In the grand halls of Willow Grange, a priceless sapphire ring vanishes during a glittering family reunion, plunging the Haverford estate into a web of suspicion. Was it Charles, the charming nephew drowning in gambling debts? Beatrice, the proud sister hiding financial ruin? Grayson, the loyal butler who knows every secret passage? Or Clara, the enigmatic guest with a shadowy past? Join Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming sleuth, as she unravels lies, probes hidden motives, and sets a cunning trap to reveal the thief in a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery, where no one is above suspicion, and the truth lies in the shadows of human nature. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Willow Grange. The late October sun cast a golden haze over Willow Grange, its ivy-clad walls glowing against the crisp air of the Wiltshire countryside. Leaves, brittle and amber, danced across the gravel drive as carriages, some motor, some still horse-drawn, delivered the Haverford family and their guests to the annual reunion. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in a sensible woolen shawl, sat by a tall, mullioned window in the morning room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the arriving party. She had been invited by her old friend, Lady Eleanor Haverford, whose letters had hinted at a growing unease within the family, though she had not specified why. Miss Marple, never one to resist a puzzle, had accepted with her usual quiet curiosity. The hall echoed with the hum of reunion, cousins exchanging anecdotes, aunts fussing over seating arrangements, and servants gliding silently with trays of sherry and delicate sandwiches. Eleanor, regal despite her 60 years, presided over the gathering with practiced grace. On her left hand, catching the light from a chandelier, was the Haverford heirloom, a sapphire ring, its deep blue stone framed by intricate gold filigree, said to have been a gift from a long-dead earl to his bride. Its history was woven into the family's pride, whispered about in drawing rooms from London to Bath. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, noted how the ring drew glances, some admiring, others less easily read. The guests were a varied lot. Charles Haverford, Eleanor's nephew, cut a dashing figure with his easy smile and tailored suit, though his eyes betrayed a restless edge. Beatrice Langley, Eleanor's younger sister, swept in with the air of a woman accustomed to attention, her emerald brooch a bold but slightly tarnished rival to the sapphire. Mr. Grayson, the butler, moved with the precision of a metronome, his face a mask of professional neutrality. Among the newcomers was Mrs. Clara Wentworth, a guest introduced as a distant acquaintance from Eleanor's charitable committees, her polished manners tinged with an elusive quality that piqued Miss Marple's interest. As the afternoon waned, the party adjourned to the dining room, where a long mahogany table gleamed under candlelight. The conversation sparkled. Talk of London's latest plays, the season's hunts, and, inevitably, the ring. Beatrice, seated near Eleanor, remarked on its beauty with a touch too much fervor, her fingers brushing her own jewelry as if to compare. Charles across the table laughed a little too loudly at a jest, his gaze flickering toward the ring. Clara, poised and silent, seemed to study the room's dynamics, while Grayson, overseeing the service, appeared to notice everything yet reveal nothing. It was during the dessert course, poached pears in claret, that Eleanor's hand rose to her throat, her face paling. "My ring?" she whispered, her voice cutting through the chatter. She held up her bare hand, the absence of the sapphire glaringly apparent. The room stilled. Guests exchanged glances, forks paused mid-air, and a footman nearly dropped a tray. Eleanor's distress was palpable, her composure fraying as she insisted the ring had been on her finger at the meal's start. A search of the table yielded nothing, no glint of gold, no trace of sapphire. The family retired to the drawing room, where murmurs of theft replaced the earlier gaiety. Charles suggested a mishap, perhaps the ring slipping off during the meal, but his casual tone rang hollow. Beatrice, clutching her shawl, proposed it might be found in the morning, though her eyes darted nervously. Grayson assured Eleanor that the staff would search every corner, his voice steady, but his hands clasped a fraction too tightly. Clara offered sympathies, her words smooth yet curiously detached. The local constable was summoned, but Miss Marple, her knitting untouched in her lap, observed the undercurrents of suspicion already rippling through the room. As the guests dispersed to their quarters, Miss Marple lingered by the fire, her mind sifting through the evening's details. The ring's disappearance was no accident, she felt certain. Its value was not merely monetary but symbolic, a magnet for envy or desperation. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a missing locket had once unmasked a village secret, and knew that here, too, the truth lay in the subtleties of human behavior. With a quiet resolve, she determined to watch and listen, confident that Willow Grange held its own story, waiting to be unraveled. Chapter 2. The Suspects Emerge. The morning after the disappearance of the Haverford sapphire ring dawned gray and damp, the Wiltshire mist curling around Willow Grange like a shroud. Inside, the grand house felt less festive than the previous evening, its oak-paneled halls echoing with hushed conversations and the clatter of breakfast trays. Miss Jane Marple, seated at a small table in the morning room, sipped her tea and nibbled a slice of toast, her eyes darting about with the alertness of a sparrow. The air was thick with unease, as if the very walls of the estate sensed the violation of the theft. Lady Eleanor Haverford, her face drawn but composed, had summoned the family and key guests to the drawing room at 10 o'clock to discuss the matter. Miss Marple, ever unobtrusive, arrived early, settling into a high-backed chair near a window overlooking the sodden garden. Her knitting lay in her lap, a prop as much as a pastime, allowing her to observe without seeming to pry. The drawing room, with its heavy velvet curtains and portraits of stern-faced Haverfords, was a fitting stage for what promised to be a tense gathering. Eleanor entered first, her gray silk dress a somber contrast to the previous night's elegance. The absence of the sapphire ring on her hand was conspicuous, a silent accusation that hung over the room. She took her place by the fireplace, her posture regal, but her eyes betraying a flicker of distress. One by one, the others arrived, each carrying the weight of suspicion in their own way. Charles Haverford, Eleanor's nephew, sauntered in with a studied nonchalance that Miss Marple found unconvincing. His dark hair was neatly combed, his tie impeccably knotted, but his fingers twitched as he lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the dim light. At 28, Charles had the charm of youth and the weariness of experience, his reputation as a man fond of cards and horses preceding him. Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand as he exhaled a plume of smoke, his gaze avoiding Eleanor's. Beatrice Langley, Eleanor's younger sister, followed, her entrance marked by the rustle of her taffeta skirt and the sharp clack of her heels. Beatrice, a widow of 50, carried herself with the assurance of one accustomed to admiration, her auburn hair swept into an elaborate chignon. Yet her eyes, A pale green that might have been striking in softer light darted restlessly, and her lips pursed as she surveyed the room. She wore a pearl brooch, its luster a faint echo of the lost sapphire, and Miss Marple wondered if the choice was deliberate. Mr. Grayson, the butler, entered with the quiet efficiency that defined him. His black suit was immaculate, his graying hair smoothed back, and his expression as unreadable as a blank page. 30 years in the Haverford service had made him a fixture, yet his presence was unobtrusive, almost ghostly. He stood near the door, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on a point just above Eleanor's head. Miss Marple, who had known many a servant with secrets, sensed a guarded quality in his stillness, as if he were a man accustomed to seeing more than he spoke. Mrs. Clara Wentworth, the guest of uncertain provenance, was the last to arrive. Her navy dress was understated yet elegant, her blonde hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. She offered a polite smile as she took a seat near the edge of the group, her hands folded demurely in her lap. Clara's connection to the Haverfords was vague, a friend from Eleanor's charitable work in London, or so it was said, but her poised demeanor suggested a woman who navigated social circles with ease. Miss Marple, however, caught the faintest tightening of Clara's jaw when Eleanor mentioned the ring, a detail that lodged in her mind like a burr. Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice steady but laced with strain. "As you all know," she began, "the sapphire ring, a cherished piece of our family's history, was taken last night during dinner. I've informed the constable, who will arrive this afternoon, but I wish to address this matter among ourselves first. The ring was on my finger at the start of the meal. By dessert, it was gone. I ask that anyone with knowledge of its whereabouts speak now, for the sake of honesty." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the faint tick of the mantel clock. Charles shifted in his seat, crossing one leg over the other with a forced air of ease. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, his voice light but edged with impatience. "Surely it's simply misplaced? Rings slip off, don't they? Perhaps it's under the table or caught in a napkin." His suggestion hung in the air, plausible yet unconvincing, and Miss Marple noted the quick glance he cast toward the door, as if measuring the distance to an exit. Beatrice gave a sharp laugh, her fingers toying with her brooch. "Misplaced? Really, Charles, that ring is worth a small fortune. It doesn't just vanish into a napkin. Someone took it, and we all know it." Her tone was accusatory, her eyes sweeping the room, lingering briefly on Clara before returning to Eleanor. "I was seated beside you, Eleanor, and I saw nothing untoward, but I dare say we should search everyone's rooms, starting with those who left the table last night." Clara's eyebrows rose slightly, but her voice remained calm. "A bold suggestion, Mrs. Langley," she said, her smile polite but cool. "I was in the powder room for a few minutes during dinner, as you may recall. Hardly time to orchestrate a theft, but I agree, a search might put minds at ease." Her words were reasonable, yet Miss Marple detected a faint challenge in her tone, as if daring Beatrice to press further. Grayson, still standing, inclined his head slightly. "If I may, my lady," he said to Eleanor, "the staff have already searched the dining room and adjacent areas this morning. No trace of the ring was found. I assure you, none of the servants would dream of such an act." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, and Miss Marple wondered if his loyalty to the family extended to shielding one of its members, or perhaps himself. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "I trust no one here would act out of malice," she said, though her eyes betrayed doubt. "But the ring's value is not merely monetary. It has been in our family for generations, a symbol of our heritage. I implore you to consider what you may have seen or heard last night. Any detail, however small, could help." Miss Marple, who had remained silent, now spoke, her voice soft but clear. "If I may, Lady Eleanor, I wonder if we might clarify the sequence of events. The dining room was crowded, and people moved about. Perhaps someone noticed something, a gesture, a moment of distraction that seemed unimportant at the time." Her eyes, bright and unassuming, swept the room, lingering on each face. She had learned long ago, in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, that people revealed more when they thought themselves unobserved. Charles stubbed out his cigarette, his movements abrupt. "Well, I stepped out for a cigar during the fish course," he admitted, shrugging. "Needed a breath of air. I wasn't gone long, 5 minutes perhaps. The ring was still there when I left, I'm sure of it." His tone was defensive, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush creeping up his neck. 5 minutes, she thought, was ample time for a deft hand. Beatrice sniffed. "I spilled some wine on my napkin during the soup course," she said, her voice clipped. "I was fussing with it for a moment, but I hardly think that's relevant. I was at the table the entire time. Eleanor, right beside you." Her insistence was firm, yet Miss Marple caught the way. Her fingers tightened around her brooch, as if anchoring herself to a truth she needed to believe. Clara leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "As I said, I visited the powder room just before dessert. The corridor was quiet, and I saw no one else. I returned in time for the pears, but by then, Eleanor, you'd noticed the ring was gone." Her account was precise, almost rehearsed, and Miss Marple wondered if Clara's brevity concealed more than it revealed. Grayson, prompted by Eleanor's glance, added, "I was in and out of the dining room, overseeing the service. The staff were busy, and I noticed nothing unusual. The French doors to the garden were closed, though I checked them myself before dinner." His words were measured, but Miss Marple's mind snagged on the mention of the French doors. They opened onto a secluded garden path, a detail she filed away for later. The discussion yielded no confessions, only a tangle of denials and half-truths. Eleanor, her face tight with disappointment, dismissed the group, asking them to remain on the estate until the constable arrived. As the others dispersed, Charles to the billiard room, Beatrice to her suite, Clara to the library, and Grayson to his duties, Miss Marple remained, her knitting needles clicking softly. Eleanor approached her, her voice low. "Jane, you've a knack for seeing what others miss. Will you help me? I cannot bear the thought of distrust poisoning this house." Miss Marple's smile was gentle but resolute. "Of course, Eleanor. I shall do my best. People, you know, are much the same everywhere. A little observation often reveals what words conceal." She thought of a pilfered silver spoon in St. Mary Mead, recovered after a careful study of a housemaid's habits, and knew that here, too, the truth lay in the details. As Eleanor left to confer with the housekeeper, Miss Marple turned her attention to the room's occupants, replaying their words and gestures in her mind. Charles's fidgeting hands suggested a man under pressure, perhaps financial, given the rumors of his London escapades. Beatrice's sharp tone and restless eyes hinted at a pride wounded by circumstance, her widowhood not as comfortable as she led on. Grayson's calm was too perfect, like a pond hiding depths unseen, and Clara's detached poise felt like a mask, one Miss Marple had seen on others who played their parts too well. She rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, and made her way to the dining room, where the theft had occurred. The long table, now cleared, stood silent, its polished surface reflecting the gray light from the windows. Miss Marple paced slowly, her eyes scanning the floor, the chairs, the heavy damask curtains. A footman, polishing silver in the corner, glanced up, but she waved him off with a kindly smile. Near Eleanor's seat, she paused, picturing the dinner, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the moment of distraction when a ring might slip from a finger, or be slipped away by another. The French doors caught her attention again. They were locked now, but Grayson's mention of checking them suggested they were not always so secure. She stepped closer, noting the faint scuff on the threshold, as if someone had brushed against it in haste. Outside, the garden path wound toward a copse of elms, invisible from the house. A perfect route for a thief, she mused, or for someone to hide their prize. She made a mental note to examine the garden later, when the mist lifted. Returning to her chair, Miss Marple considered the suspects anew. Charles's brief absence during the fish course was suspicious, but his openness about it suggested either innocence or audacity. Beatrice's wine spill could have been a clumsy distraction, though her proximity to Eleanor made boldness risky. Grayson, with his access to every corner of the house, could have acted unseen, but his loyalty to the Haverfords seemed genuine. Or was it a facade? Clara, the outsider, had the least obvious motive, yet her vague background and calculated calm made her an enigma. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a long-ago theft in St. Mary Mead, where a vicar's wife had taken a neighbor's pearls to fund a charitable cause, her guilt masked by fervent denial. Motives, she knew, were rarely simple. Greed, desperation, loyalty, even love could twist a heart toward theft. The sapphire ring, with its history and value, was a beacon for such impulses. As she gathered her knitting and prepared to join Eleanor for luncheon, Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of anticipation. The constable might search for fingerprints or interrogate the staff, but she would pursue the subtler clues. A glance, a hesitation, a truth half-spoken. Willow Grange, like any village, held its secrets, and she was determined to uncover them. Chapter 3. A study in character. The mist had lifted by midday, leaving Willow Grange bathed in a pale, watery light that filtered through the tall windows of the morning room. Miss Jane Marple sat alone, her knitting a soft rhythm in her hands, though her mind was far from the scarf taking shape. The sapphire ring's disappearance had cast a shadow over the house, and the morning's gathering had only deepened her sense that the truth lay not in grand gestures, but in the quiet habits and hidden flaws of those around her. She had learned, in the narrow lanes of St. Mary Mead, that character was the key to any mystery, and so she set about her inquiries with the delicate precision of a botanist, examining rare specimens. Her first opportunity came over a pot of Earl Grey with Lady Eleanor, who had retreated to her private sitting room to escape the murmurs of the household. The room was a sanctuary of soft blues and creams, with a writing desk cluttered with letters and a framed miniature of the sapphire ring's original owner, a Haverford bride from centuries past. Eleanor's hands, bare of the ring, trembled slightly as she poured tea, her composure fraying at the edges. "Jane," she said, her voice low, I cannot fathom why anyone here would do such a thing. The ring is not just a jewel, it's our history, our pride. To think it was taken under my own roof." She trailed off, her eyes fixed on the miniature. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her expression one of gentle concern. "People act for all sorts of reasons, Eleanor. Some they scarcely understand themselves. Tell me about those who were closest to you last night. Charles, for instance. Has he seemed himself lately?" Eleanor hesitated, her cup pausing mid-air. "Charles is spirited," she said carefully. "He's always been charming, but reckless. He's been in London these past months, and I've heard whispers of debts, cards, horses, the usual follies of youth. He came back to Willow Grange only 2 days ago, looking strained. I thought the reunion might steady him, but now—" Her voice wavered, betraying her affection for her nephew, tempered by doubt. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "And Beatrice? She seems a woman of strong opinions." Eleanor's lips tightened. "My sister has always been proud, perhaps too much so. Since her husband's death, her finances have been precarious, though she'd never admit it. She was quite taken with the ring last night, commenting on its clarity, its setting. I thought it mere sisterly interest, but now I wonder." She sighed, setting her cup down. "Beatrice has a sharp tongue, but theft? I cannot believe it of her." "And Mr. Grayson?" Miss Marple prompted, her tone mild. "He seems the soul of loyalty." "Oh, Grayson is indispensable," Eleanor said, a faint smile breaking through. "He's been with us since I was a girl, always discreet, always reliable. He knows every secret of this house, from the wine cellar to the hidden panels in the library, but he's never given me cause to doubt him." Her smile faded. "Though I suppose one never knows." Miss Marple tilted her head as if considering a trivial matter. "And Mrs. Wentworth? She's a newer acquaintance, I gather." Eleanor frowned slightly. "Clara? Yes, we met through a London charity committee last year. She's charming, well-traveled, but I confess I know little of her past. She's been a gracious guest, always asking about the family, our history. I thought her curiosity flattering, but now it feels pointed." She shook her head as if dismissing the thought. "I'm seeing shadows everywhere, Jane." "Not shadows, perhaps," Miss Marple said gently, "but threads worth following. People reveal themselves in small ways, don't they? A word, a glance, a habit." She smiled, her eyes bright with purpose. "May I speak with the others, in my quiet way? I shan't alarm them." Eleanor nodded, gratitude softening her features. "Please, Jane, your insight is a comfort." Leaving Eleanor to her letters, Miss Marple made her way to the library, where she found Charles leafing through a racing journal, his cigarette case open on the table. He looked up, his smile quick but strained. "Miss Marple," he said, rising, "come to grill me about Aunt Eleanor's ring? I'm afraid I'm as baffled as anyone." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side. "Oh, I'm not one for grilling, Mr. Haverford," she said, her voice light. "I merely like to chat. You've been in London, I hear. It must be quite a change from Willow Grange." Charles laughed, a touch too heartily. "London's a whirl, all right. Clubs, theaters, a bit of fun at the tables. But it wears thin, you know. I came back to breathe country air, see the family." His fingers drummed the armrest, betraying his ease. Miss Marple's needles moved steadily. "And the ring, such a lovely piece. Did you notice it last night, before it vanished?" His eyes flickered just for a moment. "Oh, sure. Aunt Eleanor was flashing it about, as always. hard to miss, but I was out for a smoke when the fuss started, so I didn't see anything odd. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Probably rolled under a rug or something. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes soft but searching. Perhaps, though it's curious, isn't it, how things disappear just when everyone's distracted. I once knew a young man in my village, fond of cards like you, who took a silver watch to settle a debt. He meant to return it, of course, but intentions are slippery things. Charles's smile faltered, and he lit another cigarette, his movements jerky. I'm not that sort, Miss Marple. I like a flutter, sure, but I'm no thief. His tone was firm, but his eyes slid to the window, as if longing for escape. Leaving him to his journal, Miss Marple sought out Beatrice, who was in the conservatory, arranging roses in a vase with unnecessary vigor. Her green eyes snapped to Miss Marple, her expression guarded. "If you're here about the ring, I've nothing to add," she said briskly. "I was at Eleanor's side all evening. I'd have noticed if someone snatched it." Miss Marple admired a nearby orchid, her tone conversational. "Of course, Mrs. Langley. It's such a muddle, isn't it? You must know the ring well, being Eleanor's sister. Such a striking piece." Beatrice's hands stilled, her lips pursing. "It's exquisite, yes. A family treasure, though I've always thought my own jewels hold their own." She touched her pearl brooch, a gesture Miss Marple noted as almost defiant. "I don't covet Eleanor's things, if that's what you're implying." "Oh, I imply nothing," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I only wonder what it's like, living in the shadow of such a legacy. In my village, there was a lady who sold her mother's cameo to keep up appearances. Pride can be a heavy burden." Beatrice's cheeks flushed, and she snipped a rose stem with a sharp snap. "I manage quite well, thank you. My late husband left me comfortable enough, despite what some might whisper." Her voice was tart, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, and moved on to find Grayson, who was overseeing the polishing of silver in the pantry. His posture was erect, his manner impeccable, but his eyes met hers, with a calm that felt almost too deliberate. "Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly, "how may I assist you?" "I'm just an old woman with too many questions," she said, her tone self-deprecating. "You must see everything in this house, Mr. Grayson, with all your years of service. Did anything strike you as unusual last night?" Grayson's expression remained impassive. "Nothing out of the ordinary, madam. The dinner proceeded smoothly, though I was in and out attending to the staff. I regret I noticed nothing about the ring." His voice was even, but Miss Marple caught the faintest tightening of his jaw. "You must know the family well," she pressed gently. "Mr. Charles, for instance, does he often step out during meals?" Grayson hesitated, a rare crack in his composure. "Mr. Charles is spirited, madam. He enjoys his freedoms, as young men do. I try not to judge." His words were careful, but Miss Marple sensed a disapproval he did not voice. As for Clara Wentworth, Miss Marple found her in the drawing-room, reading a novel with an air of studied calm. She looked up, her smile polite but guarded. "Miss Marple, have you come to unravel our little mystery?" she asked, her tone light. "Merely to understand," Miss Marple replied. "Smart assistant," replied, her needles clicking. "I'm sure it will resolve itself, Mrs. Wentworth. These things often do." Clara closed her book, her fingers lingering on the cover. "I hope so. I was only away briefly last night, as I said. I saw nothing amiss, though I suppose in a house like this, secrets are as common as shadows." Miss Marple tilted her head, intrigued by the metaphor. Indeed. And you, being new to Willow Grange, must find its history fascinating. Have you visited many such houses? Clara's smile tightened. A few. I enjoy old families, their stories. The Haverfords have quite a legacy. Her words were smooth, but her eyes were cautious, as if weighing Miss Marple's intent. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple retired to her room, her mind a tapestry of impressions. Charles's debts, Beatrice's pride, Grayson's discretion, Clara's elusiveness, each a thread in the mystery. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead, spinster, who hid a stolen locket in her hymn book, her piety a mask for guilt. Here, too, the ring's thief would betray themselves, not in words, but in the quiet language of character. Chapter 4. The Dinner Recalled. The afternoon at Willow Grange settled into a quiet unease, the house's grandeur muted by the lingering shadow of the stolen sapphire ring. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, made her way to the dining room, where the theft had occurred the previous evening. The long mahogany table, now bare of its damask cloth and silver candelabras, stood like a silent witness to the crime. She paused by the French doors, their glass panes reflecting the pale light of the overcast sky, and considered the sequence of events that had unfolded during the fateful dinner. To unravel the mystery, she knew, she must reconstruct the evening with precision, piecing together the movements and distractions that had allowed a thief to act unnoticed. In her experience, gleaned from the small dramas of St. Mary Mead, it was often the overlooked detail, a spilled glass, a fleeting absence, that held the key. Miss Marple requested a quiet word with the household staff, beginning with Mary, the young parlor maid who had served at dinner. They met in the butler's pantry, a narrow room lined with gleaming silver and crystal, where Mary fidgeted with her apron, her round face flushed with nerves. "Oh, Miss Marple, I don't know what I saw, truly," she began, her voice trembling. "It was such a busy night, with all the plates and glasses, and her ladyship so particular about the service." Miss Marple's smile was reassuring, her tone as soothing as a vicar's wife at a church bazaar. "Just tell me what you remember, my dear, from the start of dinner. No detail is too small. You were at the sideboard, I expect. Helping Mr. Grayson?" Mary nodded, her hands twisting the apron's hem. "Yes, ma'am. We began with the soup, cream of asparagus it was. Her ladyship wore the ring then. I saw it catch the candlelight when she lifted her spoon. Everyone was at the table, talking and laughing, though Mr. Charles seemed a bit restless, tapping his fork like he does when he's impatient." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained gentle. "Restless, you say? Did he stay at the table throughout the soup course?" Mary frowned, thinking. "Well, he was there at the start, but he got up just after, saying he needed a cigar. He went out through the French doors to the garden, said he'd be quick, and he was back before the fish was served, I think. 5 minutes, maybe less." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the timing. "And Mrs. Langley, her ladyship's sister? She was beside Lady Eleanor, wasn't she?" "Oh, yes, ma'am," Mary said, warming to her task. "Mrs. Langley spilled her wine during the soup course. Red wine it was, and it stained her napkin something awful. She fussed over it, dabbing with her cloth, and I had to fetch a fresh one from the sideboard. She stayed put, though, right by her ladyship." Miss Marple's needles, which she had brought as a matter of habit, clicked softly in her lap. "A spill can be quite distracting, can't it? Did anyone else seem to notice? Mary tilted her head. Well, her ladyship looked over, of course, and Mr. Grayson came to help with the napkin. But everyone else was chatting. Mrs. Wentworth was telling a story about her travels in Italy, and the other guests were listening. It was a bit of a flurry, what with the wine and all. "And Mrs. Wentworth herself?" Miss Marple asked, her tone light. "She was at the table too?" Mary hesitated, her brow furrowing. "She was, ma'am, but she excused herself just before the main course, said she needed the powder room. She went out through the hall door, not the French ones. She wasn't gone long. Back by the time we served the roast. I didn't see her near her ladyship's chair, though." Miss Marple smiled encouragingly. "You've a good memory, Mary. And Mr. Grayson, where was he during all this?" "Mr. Grayson was in and out, ma'am, directing us maids and footmen. He was at the sideboard when Mrs. Langley spilled her wine. Then he stepped into the pantry for a moment to fetch more napkins. He's always moving, Mr. Grayson is, but he keeps an eye on everything." Miss Marple thanked Mary and sent her back to her duties, her mind turning over the maid's account. The soup course had been a moment of chaos. Charles's absence, Beatrice's spill, Grayson's comings and goings, Clara's brief departure. Any one of them could have used the distraction to slip the ring from Eleanor's finger, though the act would require a deftness bordering on audacity. She recalled a St. Mary Mead incident, where a pickpocket had lifted a watch during a crowded fete, using a spilled tray of scones as cover. The principle was the same. Chaos bred opportunity. Next, she sought out Thomas, the footman who had stood near the French doors during dinner. She found him polishing boots in the scullery, his lanky frame bent over his task. He straightened at her approach, his expression wary but polite. "Miss Marple, ma'am, I hope I've done nothing wrong." "Not at all, Thomas," she said, her voice warm. "I'm only trying to piece together last night's dinner. You were by the French doors, I believe. Did you see Mr. Charles when he stepped out?" Thomas nodded, brushing a lock of hair from his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. He went out for his cigar, like he said. I opened the doors for him, and he stood just outside, smoking. I could see him in the garden, near the rose bushes. He wasn't gone long, back before I had to fetch the wine for the next course." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. "The garden, you say? Was anyone else out there, or did you notice anything unusual?" Thomas thought for a moment. "It was dark, ma'am, but I thought I saw a shadow moving near the elms, further down the path. Could have been a trick of the light, though. No one else was supposed to be out there. I didn't think much of it at the time." "A shadow," Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. "And the doors, were they locked after Mr. Charles returned?" "Yes, ma'am," Thomas said firmly. "Mr. Grayson always checks them before dinner, and I locked them myself after Mr. Charles came back in. No one else used them, far as I saw." Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the dining room itself, where she stood by Eleanor's chair, picturing the scene. The table had been set for 12, with Eleanor at the head, Beatrice to her right, Charles across from her, and Clara 2 seats down. The French doors to the left offered a discreet exit to the garden, while the hall door used by Clara led to the powder room and beyond. Grayson's movements, as head of the service, would have taken him between the table, the sideboard, and the pantry, his presence constant yet unobtrusive. She knelt by Eleanor's chair, her eyes scanning the floor for any trace the staff might have missed. The carpet was thick, its pattern intricate, but near the base of the table, she spotted a faint smudge, as if someone had brushed against it with a muddy shoe. It was too small to be conclusive, but she noted its position, close to where Beatrice had sat, and not far from the French doors. A spill, a cigar, a powder room visit, a shadow in the garden. Each fragment was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Returning to her seat in the morning room, Miss Marple considered the timeline. The ring had been on Eleanor's finger during the soup course, as Mary confirmed, its sapphire glinting in the candlelight. By the dessert course, poached pears in claret, it was gone, noticed only when Eleanor raised her hand to her throat. The window of opportunity was narrow, spanning the fish and main courses, when distractions were rife. Charles's cigar break placed him outside with access to the garden, but his visibility to Thomas suggested he hadn't strayed far. Beatrice's wine spill, though clumsy, could have been a calculated diversion, her proximity to Eleanor ideal for a swift theft. Grayson's constant movement gave him opportunity, though his motives were unclear. Clara's absence to the powder room, brief as it was, left her unaccounted for at a critical moment. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a long-ago theft in St. Mary Mead, where a village girl had taken a silver spoon during a tea party, using a spilled cup as cover. The girl's motive had been simple, envy of a wealthier friend, but the method was bold, relying on the chaos of the moment. Here, the sapphire ring's value suggested a deeper motive, greed, desperation, or perhaps something more personal. The French doors, with their garden access, intrigued her most. A thief could have slipped the ring outside, to be retrieved later, or passed it to an accomplice in the shadows Thomas had glimpsed. But who among the suspects had the nerve, and who the need? As she gathered her knitting and prepared to join Eleanor for tea, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The constable, due soon, would no doubt focus on fingerprints and searches, but she knew the truth lay in the interplay of human nature, motive, opportunity, and the small betrayals of behavior. The dining room had been a stage, its players each performing a role. She would watch them closely, certain that one would falter, revealing the hand that had claimed the Haverford sapphire. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Garden. The afternoon light at Willow Grange had softened, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns as Miss Jane Marple stepped into the garden, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The air carried the damp scent of earth and fading roses, and a faint breeze stirred the elms that bordered the estate. The French doors of the dining room, through which Charles had passed the previous evening, loomed large in her mind. They offered a discreet exit, a thief's pathway to conceal their prize, and the footman's mention of a shadow near the elms had piqued her curiosity. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved a case of stolen church funds by noting a scuffed path behind the vestry, and she suspected the garden held clues to the sapphire ring's fate. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the ground with the patience of one, accustomed to finding meaning in the mundane. The path from the French doors wound past a bed of late blooming roses, their petals wilting under the weight of recent rain. Near the doors, she paused, crouching with a slight creak of her knees to examine the threshold. The faint scuff she had noticed earlier in the dining room extended here, a smudge of mud on the stone step, too subtle for the staff's hasty search. It suggested a hurried exit, perhaps, or a careless moment. She straightened, her shawl slipping slightly, and followed the path toward the rose bushes, where Thomas, the footman, had seen Charles smoking. The rose bushes, dense and thorny, formed a natural screen from the house, their blooms a muted red against the gray sky. Miss Marple circled them, her gaze falling on a cigarette butt crushed into the gravel, its paper crumpled but intact. She bent closer, careful not to disturb it. The brand was unfamiliar. Players, not the Dunhill cigarettes Charles favored, which she had seen in his silver case. A curious discrepancy, she thought, for a man who claimed to have smoked here alone. She left the butt undisturbed, noting its position near a low stone bench, and continued along the path toward the elms. The copse of elms stood at the garden's edge, their branches forming a canopy that obscured the view from the house. The ground here was softer, the grass worn in patches as if trodden recently. Miss Marple's eyes caught a glint in the soil, a tiny shard of glass, perhaps from a broken bottle, half buried near a tree root. It was an odd find, unconnected to the ring but suggestive of someone's presence. She recalled Thomas's mention of a shadow and wondered if it had been more than a trick of the light. A thief might have lingered here, she mused, to hide the ring or meet an accomplice, away from prying eyes. Her thoughts were interrupted by the crunch of footsteps. Turning, she saw Mr. Dobbs, the head gardener, a wiry man with weathered hands and a cap pulled low over his brow. He tipped it politely, his expression curious but guarded. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Didn't expect to see you out here. Looking for something?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her tone light. "Oh, just enjoying the garden, Mr. Dobbs. It's so peaceful, though I imagine it sees its share of comings and goings. Were you about last night, during the dinner?" Dobbs scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not during the dinner, ma'am, no. I was in the potting shed till late, sorting bulbs for spring. But I did see Mrs. Langley, Mrs. Beatrice, that is, near these very rose bushes just after dark. She was pacing like she was vexed about something. Didn't stay long, mind, but I thought it odd, her being out in the chill." Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for use, though she kept her hands still. "Mrs. Langley, you say? How interesting. Did she see you, or say anything?" "No, ma'am," Dobbs replied. "I was by the shed, half hidden. She didn't notice me, just paced a bit, then went back toward the house. Didn't see no one else, though it was dark, and I wasn't looking for trouble." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning over this new piece. Beatrice had claimed to stay indoors all evening, fussing over her wine-stained napkin, yet here was evidence of her in the garden, close to where Charles had smoked. Had she followed him, or had her own errand brought her here? The cigarette butt, too, raised questions. Whose was it, if not Charles's? She made a mental note to ask about the household smoking habits, a detail that might seem trivial but could prove telling. Returning to the path, Miss Marple approached the garden gate, a wrought-iron affair that led to a lane beyond the estate. Grayson, she recalled, had mentioned checking the gate before dinner, but she tested it now, finding it locked with a sturdy padlock. Yet the ground nearby showed signs of disturbance, scuffed earth, a few broken twigs, as if someone had climbed over or lingered. She peered through the bars, noting the lane's seclusion, perfect for a discreet exchange. The ring, she thought, could have been passed to an outsider here, though the locked gate suggested a key, or an accomplice within. Her next stop was the house, where she sought out Grayson in the butler's pantry. He was inspecting a tray of crystal glasses, his movements precise, his face as unreadable as ever. "Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly. "I trust the garden was pleasant?" "Very," she replied, her tone mild. "Though I wonder, Mr. Grayson, about the garden gate. You said you checked it before dinner, but do you keep the key?" Grayson's eyes met hers, steady but guarded. "I do, madam, in the pantry safe. It's rarely used except by the gardeners. I locked it myself yesterday afternoon, and it was secure when I checked again this morning." Miss Marple nodded, her smile encouraging. "And the French doors?" "Thomas mentioned locking them after Mr. Charles's return. No one else used them, I suppose?" "Not to my knowledge," Grayson said, his voice even. "The staff were instructed to keep them closed during dinner, and I saw no one else pass through. Of course, I was occupied with the service, so I cannot be certain." His answer was careful, and Miss Marple noted the slight emphasis on his duties, as if to distance himself from the moment of the theft. She thanked him and moved on, her mind sifting through the possibilities. The garden was a nexus. Charles's cigar, Beatrice's pacing, a mysterious shadow, a misplaced cigarette butt. Each pointed to a moment of opportunity, but the motive remained elusive. She found Clara Wentworth in the conservatory, arranging a bouquet with a precision that belied her casual air. Clara looked up, her smile polite but cool. "Miss Marple, out sleuthing in the garden? I hear it's lovely this time of year." Miss Marple chuckled, settling onto a wicker chair. "Oh, I'm no sleuth, Mrs. Wentworth, just an old woman fond of roses, though I did notice the garden's quite secluded, especially near the elms. Were you out there last night? By chance?" Clara's hands paused, a chrysanthemum dangling from her fingers. "Me? No, I stayed indoors after dinner. I was in the powder room during the meal, as I said, and then joined the others in the drawing room. Gardens at night aren't my preference. Too chilly." Her tone was light, but her eyes held a flicker of caution. Miss Marple's expression remained benign. "Of course. Though it's curious, isn't it, how a garden can hide so much. I once knew a lady in my village who hid a stolen brooch in a flower pot, thinking no one would look there. People can be so inventive." Clara's smile tightened, and she returned to her flowers. "Inventive, indeed. I hope you find your thief, Miss Marple. It's such a pity about the ring." As Miss Marple left the conservatory, her thoughts turned to the shadow Thomas had seen. It could have been Beatrice, pacing as Dobbs described, or someone else entirely. Perhaps Clara, despite her denial, or even Grayson, whose duties gave him freedom to move unseen. The cigarette butt, too, gnawed at her. Charles's Dunhills were distinctive, yet the player's butt suggested another presence, or a deliberate misdirection. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead theft, where a gardener's lad had planted a false clue to divert suspicion, only to betray himself with a nervous laugh. Here, the truth was close, she felt, hidden in the garden's shadows. Returning to her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting a steady rhythm as she pieced together the fragments. The garden was more than a backdrop. It was a stage for the thief's escape, whether to hide the ring or pass it beyond the estate. Charles's brief absence, Beatrice's unexpected presence, Grayson's access to the gate, Clara's vague denials, each was a thread in a tapestry of deception. The ring, she suspected, was still close, perhaps concealed in the garden or entrusted to an accomplice. As the afternoon faded into evening, Miss Marple resolved to watch the suspects closely, certain that one would betray their guilt in a glance, a gesture, or a shadow cast too long. Chapter 6. A Conversation with Charles. The evening at Willow Grange settled into a subdued hush, the grandeur of the estate tempered by the unresolved theft of the sapphire ring. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped over her shoulders, made her way to the billiard room, where she had learned Charles Haverford was spending his time. The room, with its green baize table and polished oak paneling, was a haven for the men of the house, its air thick with the scent of cigar smoke and old leather. Miss Marple, undaunted by the masculine domain, knew that a casual conversation could reveal more than a formal interrogation. In St. Mary Mead, she had once unraveled a case of missing church silver by chatting with a choir boy over tea, and she hoped a similar approach might coax truth from Charles's guarded charm. Charles was alone, leaning over the billiard table, his cue poised as he lined up a shot. The click of the balls echoed in the quiet room, and he glanced up as Miss Marple entered, his smile quick but strained. "Miss Marple," he said, straightening, "come to try your hand at billiards? I'd wager you've a steady aim." His tone was light, but his eyes, shadowed by the lamplight, betrayed a wariness. Miss Marple chuckled, settling into a leather armchair near the fireplace, her knitting bag at her side. "Oh, I'm far too old for such games, Mr. Haverford," she said, her voice warm and disarming. "I prefer quieter pursuits, like knitting or a good chat. You've been in London, I hear, a lively place for a young man. Tell me, do you find it hard to leave the city's excitements for Willow Grange?" Charles set his cue down, his fingers brushing his cigarette case before he thought better of it. "London's a whirl, no doubt," he said, leaning against the table. "Clubs, races, a bit of cards, keeps the blood pumping. But family calls, you know. Aunt Eleanor's fond of these reunions, and I wouldn't miss them." His smile was practiced, but Miss Marple noted the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, a telltale sign of discomfort. She nodded, her needles clicking softly as she began a new row. "Family is so important, isn't it? Though I imagine London's temptations can be costly. In my village, we had a young man, much like you, who loved the races. Got himself into a spot of trouble over debts, poor lad. It's easy to slip, isn't it?" Charles's smile faltered, and he crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "I manage all right, Miss Marple. A flutter now and then. Sure, but I'm not in over my head. London's expensive, but I've got friends, connections." His voice was firm, but his eyes darted to the window, as if seeking an escape from her gentle scrutiny. Miss Marple's expression remained benign, her tone conversational. "Of course, you're a resourceful young man, though that ring, such a striking piece, must have caught your eye at dinner. Did you notice it on your aunt's hand before you stepped out for your cigar?" Charles hesitated, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. "Sure, I saw it. Aunt Eleanor always wears it for these occasions, flashing it about like a badge of honor. It was there during the soup course, sparkling like always. But I was out in the garden when the fuss started, so I missed whatever happened." He shrugged, but his casualness felt forced, and Miss Marple caught the slight flush creeping up his neck. "The garden," she said, her voice thoughtful. "It's so peaceful out there, near the rose bushes, though I did find a cigarette butt. Players, I believe, not your usual Dunhill, I think." Her eyes met his, bright and unassuming, but sharp with intent. Charles blinked, his hand pausing mid-gesture. "Players? Must be one of the staffs. I stick to Dunhill's. Better taste." He reached for his cigarette case, flipping it open to reveal a neat row of Dunhills, as if to prove his point. "Anyway, I was only out for a few minutes. Hardly time to nick a ring, even if I wanted to." His laugh was brittle, and he lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the dim light. Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving steadily. "Of course, a few minutes is barely enough for anything, though I've known people to do surprising things in less time. In St. Mary Mead, a lad once lifted a silver spoon in the blink of an eye, all because he needed to settle a debt. He meant to return it, naturally, but intentions can be so fragile." Her tone was gentle, almost pitying, but her gaze held Charles's, searching for a crack in his composure. He exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not that sort, Miss Marple. I like a game, sure, but I don't steal from family. That ring's probably under a table or in a maid's pocket by now." His voice carried a hint of defiance, but his fingers tightened around the cigarette, betraying his unease. Miss Marple smiled, as if satisfied, and shifted the conversation to the weather, letting Charles relax into safer territory. But as she spoke of autumn rains, her mind was elsewhere, sifting through his words. His denial was firm, yet his nervous gestures, the twitching fingers, the quick glances, suggested a man under pressure. Eleanor's mention of his debts lingered in her thoughts, as did the player's cigarette butt, an anomaly that pointed to another presence in the garden, or a deliberate attempt to mislead. Charles's brief absence during dinner was a window of opportunity, but his visibility to the footman, Thomas, made a bold theft risky. Unless, she mused, he had planned to hide the ring outside, to retrieve it later. As she rose to leave, Charles offered a parting jest about her knitting, but his eyes followed her to the door, wary and calculating. Miss Marple stepped into the corridor, her mind turning to a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a young man's gambling debts had led him to pilfer a neighbor's watch, his charm a mask for desperation. Charles, she suspected, was not so different, his easy manner a veneer over a troubled heart. But had he the nerve to steal from his aunt, or was he merely a convenient suspect, his flaws too obvious to ignore? She made her way to the drawing room, where a fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the heavy furniture. Eleanor was there, sorting through a stack of letters, her face etched with worry. "Jane," she said, looking up. "Any progress? The constable arrives tomorrow, and I dread the thought of this dragging on." Miss Marple settled beside her, her knitting resuming its rhythm. "Patience, Eleanor," she said softly. "I've spoken with Charles, and he's adamant he knows nothing, though he's a young man with troubles, I think. Debts can weigh heavily, can't they?" Eleanor sighed, her hands stilling on the letters. "I've feared as much. He's always been reckless, but I hoped he'd outgrow it. Do you think? Could he have taken it?" Miss Marple's eyes were kind but guarded. "It's too soon to say, my dear, but I've found that people, when pressed, reveal themselves. Charles is restless, and the garden last night holds more secrets than he admits. We shall see what else comes to light." As she left Eleanor to her letters, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the garden, the cigarette butt, the shadow, the scuffed earth by the gate. Charles's story was plausible, but its edges frayed under scrutiny. Had he slipped the ring from Eleanor's finger during a moment of distraction, hiding it in the rose bushes for later? Or was he a scapegoat, his debts a convenient motive for another's crime? She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Vicar's son, whose gambling led to a theft he swore he didn't commit, only to be undone by a misplaced betting slip. Charles, she sensed, was teetering on a similar edge, his charm a fragile shield against the truth. With the evening deepening, Miss Marple resolved to probe further, her next conversation likely with Beatrice, whose presence in the garden contradicted her claims. The sapphire ring, she felt, was still close, its thief bound to Willow Grange by their own guilt. As she climbed the stairs to her room, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities, each suspect a thread in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. Chapter 7. Beatrice's Secret. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Willow Grange, casting a soft glow over the polished floors and heavy drapes. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, descended the staircase with her characteristic unhurried grace, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. The house was stirring, but the air remained heavy with the unresolved theft of the sapphire ring. Her conversation with Charles had left her with a sense of his unease, his debts a looming shadow, but her instincts told her the puzzle was far from complete. Beatrice Langley, Eleanor's sharp-tongued sister, had been seen pacing in the garden, a detail that contradicted her claim of remaining indoors. Miss Marple, who had once uncovered a village scandal by noting a widow's furtive glances, knew that Beatrice's pride might conceal a deeper truth. She found Beatrice in the conservatory, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. Beatrice stood by a table, pruning a potted fern with a pair of silver shears, her movements precise but tinged with agitation. Her auburn hair was pinned tightly, and her emerald brooch gleamed against her dark dress, a bold statement of her status. She glanced up as Miss Marple entered, her green eyes narrowing slightly. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice crisp, "I suppose you're here to play detective again. I've told you, I saw nothing of the ring's theft." Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a wicker chair with a view of the garden path. "Oh, I'm no detective, Mrs. Langley," she said, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. "I'm merely curious, as old women often are. The conservatory is so charming, isn't it? A perfect place to think. Were you here last night? Perhaps after dinner?" Beatrice's shears paused, a leaf falling silently to the table. "Last night? No, I was in the drawing room with the others, as I said. After that tiresome wine spill, I had no wish to wander about." Her words were firm, but her fingers tightened around the shears, and Miss Marple noted the faint flush creeping up her neck. "Quite understandable," Miss Marple said, her needles emerging from her bag, their soft clicking a counterpoint to the tension. "Though the gardener, Mr. Dobbs, mentioned seeing you near the rose bushes after dark. He thought you seemed troubled. It must have been a chilly evening for a stroll." Beatrice's eyes flashed, and she set the shears down with a sharp clink. "Dobbs must be mistaken," she snapped. "I had no reason to be in the garden. I was indoors, as I told you. Really, Miss Marple, it's tiresome to be questioned like a common thief." Her voice was indignant, but her gaze darted to the window, as if the garden itself might betray her. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, her needles moving steadily. "Of course, mistakes happen. Though it's curious, isn't it? How gardens draw people out, even at night. In my village, St. Mary Mead, A lady once walked her garden at midnight to hide a stolen locket, thinking no one would see. Pride, I find, can lead to such secretive moments. Beatrice's lips pursed, and she turned back to her fern, her movements brisk. I have no need for secrecy, Miss Marple. My life is an open book, and I've no interest in Eleanor's ring, however fine it is. My own jewels are quite sufficient. She touched her brooch, a gesture Miss Marple recognized as a shield, a way to assert control. Before Miss Marple could press further, a maid entered, a young girl named Lily, her face flushed with urgency. "Beg pardon, ma'am," she said to Beatrice, then glanced at Miss Marple. "I couldn't help overhearing, ma'am, about the ring. I didn't mean to, but I heard something odd last night, and I thought I should say." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her tone remained gentle. "Do tell, Lily. No detail is too small in a matter like this." Lily twisted her hands, her apron creased from nervous gripping. "It was after dinner, ma'am, when I was clearing the hall table. I heard Mrs. Langley, begging your pardon, ma'am, on the telephone in the study. She was talking low, but I caught her saying something about a valuable item and meeting a man in London. I didn't think much of it then, but with the ring gone?" Her voice trailed off, her eyes wide with worry. Beatrice's face paled, then flushed with anger. "Eavesdropping, were you?" she snapped, her voice cutting. "That was a private call, about my own affairs. I was speaking to a jeweler about a brooch of mine, not Eleanor's ring. How dare you suggest otherwise?" Her indignation was fierce, but Miss Marple noted the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided Lily's. Miss Marple's smile was kind, diffusing the tension. "Thank you, Lily. You've been most helpful. No need to fret. Run along now." As the maid scurried off, Miss Marple turned to Beatrice, her tone soft but probing. "A jeweler, you say? It's natural to discuss one's treasures, isn't it? Though I wonder, Mrs. Langley, why such a call so late in the evening?" Beatrice straightened, her composure returning like a well-worn mask. "My affairs are my own, Miss Marple. My late husband left me with debts, it's true, but I manage. I was inquiring about selling a piece to settle a small matter, nothing to do with Eleanor's ring. I was at her side during dinner, as you know, and I saw nothing untoward." Her voice was steady now, but her eyes held a flicker of defiance, as if daring Miss Marple to challenge her. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Of course, debts can be such a burden. In St. Mary Mead, a widow once sold her mother's cameo to keep up appearances, only to regret it when her secret came out. It's so easy to misjudge one's needs, isn't it?" Her tone was sympathetic, but her gaze was keen, searching for a crack in Beatrice's armor. Beatrice's lips tightened, and she picked up her shears again, resuming her pruning with unnecessary force. "I've no regrets, Miss Marple, and no secrets worth hiding. If you're looking for a thief, you'd do better to question Charles and his gambling debts, or that Wentworth woman, always sniffing about the family's history." Her voice was tart, her words a deflection, but Miss Marple noted the mention of Clara, a hint of rivalry or suspicion. Thanking Beatrice, Miss Marple left the conservatory, her mind sifting through the encounter. Beatrice's denial of her garden stroll was troubling, contradicted by Dobbs's account, and Lily's overheard conversation suggested a financial strain that Beatrice's pride sought to conceal. The telephone call to a jeweler late at night was too convenient to dismiss, though whether it concerned the sapphire ring or another item remained unclear. Beatrice's proximity to Eleanor during dinner gave her opportunity, and her wine spill, as Mary had described, could have been a calculated distraction. Yet her indignation felt genuine, as if she were protecting something, her reputation, perhaps, or someone else. Miss Marple paused in the corridor, her thoughts drifting to a St. Mary Mead widow who had pawned a neighbor's bracelet to pay a creditor, her pride masking her desperation until a careless word betrayed her. Beatrice, with her sharp tongue and costly brooch, was cut from similar cloth, her financial straits a motive that could not be ignored. But was she the thief or a scapegoat for another's scheme? The garden, with its shadows and secrets, seemed to hold the answer, and Beatrice's presence there suggested she knew more than she admitted. As she made her way to the drawing room, Miss Marple encountered Eleanor, who was arranging flowers with a distracted air. "Jane," Eleanor said, her voice low, "the constable arrives this afternoon, and I'm no closer to understanding this wretched business. Have you learned anything?" Miss Marple's smile was reassuring, though her eyes were sharp with purpose. "A little, Eleanor. Mrs. Langley is a proud woman, isn't she? But pride can hide many things, as can a late-night telephone call. I shall keep watching, my dear, and listening. People, you know, always reveal themselves in time." Eleanor nodded, her face etched with worry, and Miss Marple patted her hand before continuing to the drawing room. There she settled by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as she considered her next step. Beatrice's secret, the debts, the garden stroll, the jeweler's call, was a thread in the tapestry of the theft, but it tangled with Charles's restlessness, Grayson's discretion, and Clara's elusive charm. The ring, she felt, was still within reach, its thief bound to Willow Grange by their own contradictions. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind turned to the garden once more, certain that its shadows held the key to unmasking the culprit. Chapter 8. The Butler's Discretion. The late morning at Willow Grange carried a chill that seeped through the stone walls, as if the house itself mourned the loss of the sapphire ring. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl snug about her shoulders, moved through the corridors with her usual quiet purpose, her knitting bag a constant companion. The revelations about Beatrice Langley's garden stroll and clandestine telephone call had sharpened her focus, but she knew the puzzle was far from solved. Mr. Grayson, the butler, with his impeccable service and guarded demeanor, was a figure who intrigued her. In St. Mary Mead, she had once uncovered a theft by noting a housekeeper's overly precise account of her duties, and she suspected Grayson's calm exterior might conceal a similar truth. His knowledge of the house's secrets, its passages, its routines, made him a figure worth studying, and she resolved to draw him out. She found Grayson in the pantry, a narrow room lined with shelves of polished silver and crystal, where he was meticulously arranging a tray for afternoon tea. His black suit was immaculate, his graying hair smoothed back, and his movements carried the precision of long habit. Yet Miss Marple, with her keen eye for human nature, noted the slight rigidity in his posture, as if he were bracing himself for scrutiny. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice soft and unassuming, "I hope I'm not interrupting. I so admire the order you bring to this house. It must be quite a responsibility." Grayson inclined his head, his expression as neutral as the polished teapot before him. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It is my duty to ensure Willow Grange runs smoothly, and I take it seriously." His voice was measured, each word chosen with care, and Miss Marple sensed a man accustomed to guarding his thoughts. She settled onto a stool near the door, her knitting needles emerging from her bag with their familiar soft click. "Of course, you must see everything that happens here," she said, her tone conversational. 30 years in service, I believe Lady Eleanor said. You'd know every corner of this house, wouldn't you? Even its hidden places." Grayson's hands paused briefly, arranging a sugar tongs with unnecessary care. "Indeed, madam. The house has its quirks, old passages, concealed doors, used by servants to move discreetly. But they're no secret to the staff, and I ensure they're kept secure." His eyes met hers, steady but opaque, and Miss Marple noted the faintest tightening at the corners of his mouth. "How fascinating," she said, her smile warm. "In my village, St. Mary Mead, we had a butler who knew every creak in the manor house. He once found a lost brooch in a hidden drawer, quite by chance. I wonder, did you notice anything unusual during the dinner when the ring went missing?" Grayson resumed his work, his movements deliberate. "The dinner was much as usual, Miss Marple. I was overseeing the service, moving between the dining room and pantry. The guests were lively, though Mrs. Langley's wine spill caused a small stir. I fetched a fresh napkin and ensured the table was restored. I saw nothing of the ring itself, though I recall it on her ladyship's hand early in the evening." His account was precise, almost too precise, and Miss Marple wondered if it had been rehearsed. She nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. "A busy night, then. And Mr. Charles, his cigar break must have kept you alert, with the French doors opened. Did you see him return?" Grayson's eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing his face. "I was in the pantry when Mr. Charles stepped out, but Thomas, the footman, reported he was back promptly. I checked the doors myself after the meal, and they were locked. No one else used them, to my knowledge." His voice was even, but Miss Marple caught a faint emphasis on "to my knowledge," as if he were hedging against unseen possibilities. "Such a careful eye you have," she said, her tone admiring. "Though I suppose a house like this, with its passages and gates, could tempt someone to mischief. The garden gate, for instance. You keep the key, don't you?" Grayson nodded, setting down a teacup with a soft clink. "In the pantry safe, madam, as I told you. It's rarely used, and I checked it that morning. No one requested it, and I found it secure after the theft." His words were firm, but Miss Marple noted the way. His hands lingered on the tray, as if anchoring himself to routine. Before she could press further, a footman appeared, a young man named Peter, his face flushed with nervousness. "Mr. Grayson, sir," he said, glancing at Miss Marple. "I didn't mean to overhear, but I heard you talking about the dinner. I saw something, maybe, that night." His voice faltered, and he twisted his cap in his hands. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained gentle. "Do share, Peter. Any detail might help poor Lady Eleanor." Peter hesitated, glancing at Grayson, who gave a slight nod. "It was during the fish course, sir, when Mr. Charles was out. I was near the sideboard, and I saw Mr. Grayson step into the passage, the one behind the dining room panel. He was only gone a moment, but I thought it odd, as he usually stays in sight during service." His words tumbled out, and he looked at Grayson with apology in his eyes. Grayson's face remained impassive, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Thank you, Peter," he said, his voice cool. "I did step into the passage to check a tray that had been misplaced. A minor matter, quickly resolved. I was back before the main course was served. He turned to Miss Marple, his eyes steady. "The passage is a short cut to the pantry, madam, used for efficiency. Nothing more." Miss Marple nodded, her smile encouraging. "Of course, efficiency is so important. Thank you, Peter. You've been most helpful." As the footman retreated, she turned to Grayson, her tone light. "Those passages must be a boon, though I imagine they could be tempting for someone less scrupulous. In St. Mary Mead, a maid once used a hidden stair to slip away with a silver candlestick, thinking no one would notice. Loyalty, I find, is a delicate thing." Grayson's expression did not waver, but his hands stilled on the tray. "Loyalty is my duty, Miss Marple. I've served the Haverfords for 3 decades, and I'd never betray their trust. If you're seeking a thief, you might look to those with less restraint, like Mr. Charles, whose habits strain her ladyship's patience." His voice was calm, but Miss Marple caught the faint edge of disapproval, a crack in his otherwise flawless composure. She thanked him and left the pantry, her mind buzzing with new threads. Grayson's use of the passage during dinner was intriguing, a moment unaccounted for in his otherwise meticulous routine. His loyalty to the Haverfords seemed genuine, yet his disapproval of Charles suggested a deeper judgment, perhaps a motive to protect the family, or to conceal his own actions. The passages, known only to the staff, offered a hidden route for a thief to move unseen, and Grayson's access to the garden gate key made him a figure of interest. Yet his calm was unshakable, much like a St. Mary Mead vicar she had known, whose serene manner hid a scandal until a misplaced letter revealed him. As she reached the hall, Miss Marple encountered Eleanor, who was descending the stairs, her face pale but resolute. "Jane," she said, her voice low, "the constable has been delayed until tomorrow, and I'm at my wits' end. Have you found anything to ease my mind?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her smile reassuring. "A little, Eleanor. Mr. Grayson is a model of discretion, isn't he? But even the most loyal have their moments of solitude. I'm beginning to see the shape of things. My dear, though the pieces are not yet clear, we must be patient." Eleanor nodded, her eyes searching Miss Marple's face for hope, and Miss Marple gave her a gentle squeeze before continuing to the drawing room. There, she settled by the window, her knitting a steady rhythm as she sifted through Grayson's words and Peter's revelation. The butler's brief absence in the passage, his access to the house's secrets, his quiet disapproval of Charles, all were threads in the tapestry of the theft. Yet his loyalty, if genuine, made him an unlikely thief, unless driven by a motive yet unseen. She recalled Beatrice's telephone call, Charles's cigarette discrepancy, and Clara's elusive calm, each suspect a piece of a puzzle that centered on the dining room and its garden beyond. As the afternoon faded, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the passages, hidden arteries of the house, known to Grayson and perhaps used to conceal the ring or pass it to an accomplice. The sapphire, she felt, was still close, its thief bound by their own secrets. With the constable's arrival delayed, she had time to probe further, her next target likely Clara Wentworth, whose polished exterior hid a past yet to be uncovered. As her needles clicked, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads together, certain that Grayson's discretion, like the house's hidden passages, held a clue to the truth. Chapter 9. Clara's Curious Past. The afternoon at Willow Grange draped the estate in a quiet pall, the unresolved theft of the sapphire ring casting a shadow over its polished halls. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly adjusted, moved through the house with the unassuming grace of a village spinster, her knitting bag a silent companion. Her conversation with Grayson had deepened her sense of the house's hidden currents, his discreet use of the passages, his guarded disapproval of Charles, his access to the garden gate key. Yet her instincts, honed by the small dramas of St. Mary Mead, told her that Clara Wentworth, the enigmatic guest, was a piece of the puzzle yet to be fully examined. Clara's polished charm and vague origins suggested a woman accustomed to navigating suspicion, and Miss Marple resolved to probe her past with the gentle persistence that had once unmasked a deceitful governess in her village. She found Clara in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak shelves, where the scent of old paper mingled with the faint tang of wood polish. Clara sat by a window, a book of poetry open in her lap, though her eyes seemed more focused on the garden beyond than on the page. Her navy dress was impeccable, her blonde hair coiled with precision, but Miss Marple noted the slight tension in her posture, as if she were poised for flight. "Mrs. Wentworth," Miss Marple said, her voice soft and inviting, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. The library is such a haven, isn't it? So full of stories, and not just in the books." Clara looked up, her smile polite but measured. "Miss Marple, how pleasant to see you. Yes, I find libraries soothing, though I confess I'm more curious about the stories people tell than those on the shelves." Her tone was light, but her eyes held a guarded spark, as if she sensed the purpose behind Miss Marple's visit. Miss Marple settled into a nearby armchair, her knitting needles emerging with their familiar soft click. "Oh, I quite agree," she said, her tone conversational. "People's stories are so revealing, aren't they? You've traveled widely, I hear, and met many interesting folk. How did you come to know Lady Eleanor? Her charitable work, I believe." Clara closed her book, her fingers lingering on the cover. "Yes, we met through a London committee for war widows, about a year ago. Eleanor's so dedicated, and I found her company refreshing. She invited me to this reunion, and I was delighted to see Willow Grange, such a storied place." Her words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the careful phrasing, as if each sentence were chosen to reveal little. "How charming," Miss Marple said, her needles moving steadily. "And you've an interest in old families, I gather. The Haverford ring must have caught your eye, a piece with such history. Did you notice it during dinner before you stepped out to the powder room?" Clara's smile remained, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, it was hard to miss, sparkling on Eleanor's hand during the soup course. Quite a jewel, though I'm no expert on such things. I was away briefly, as you say, and by the time I returned, the commotion had begun." Her voice was even, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on the book, a small betrayal of unease. Miss Marple nodded, her expression benign. "A brief absence, of course. The powder room is just down the hall, isn't it? Though I suppose one might pass the garden door on the way. The garden's so tempting, even at night." Her tone was light, but her gaze was sharp, watching for a reaction. Clara's smile didn't waver, though her eyes flicked to the window. "I prefer indoors at night, Miss Marple. The garden's lovely, but I had no reason to wander. I was back at the table before the dessert, as the maid confirmed." Her response was quick, almost too quick, and Miss Marple sensed a practiced quality, like a line rehearsed for an audience. Before Miss Marple could press further, the door opened, and a housemaid, Sarah, entered with a duster, her face flushed with the awkwardness of interrupting. "Beg pardon, ma'am," she said to Clara, then glanced at Miss Marple. "I didn't mean to, but I heard you talking about the dinner. I might have heard something, ma'am, about Mrs. Wentworth." Her voice trembled, and she looked down, as if regretting her boldness. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her tone remained gentle. "Do tell, Sarah. Anything you heard might help us find Lady Eleanor's ring." Sarah twisted her duster, her voice low. "It was yesterday afternoon, ma'am, before the dinner. I was dusting in the hall, and I heard Mrs. Wentworth on the telephone in the study. She was talking quiet-like, but I caught her asking someone about valuables at Willow Grange. Said she'd be in London soon and could meet. I didn't think it meant anything then, but now—" Her words trailed off, and she glanced nervously at Clara. Clara's face remained composed, though her eyes flashed with irritation. "Eavesdropping, were you?" she said, her voice cool but sharp. "That call was about a charity auction, Sarah. Nothing to do with the ring. I was discussing a donation of some old books from my collection, possibly valuable ones. It's tiresome to have my words twisted." Her tone was indignant, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hands, the way her smile seemed to strain at the edges. Miss Marple patted Sarah's arm, her smile reassuring. "Thank you, Sarah. You've been very helpful. Run along now and don't worry." As the maid hurried out, Miss Marple turned to Clara, her tone soft but probing. "A charity auction. How admirable. Though it's curious, isn't it, to discuss valuables at such a time? In St. Mary Mead, a lady once spoke of charity to cover a sale of stolen goods. People can be so clever with their words." Clara's lips tightened, and she set her book aside with deliberate care. "I assure you, Miss Marple, my intentions are above reproach. I've no need for Eleanor's ring, nor any interest in it beyond admiration. If you're looking for a thief, you might consider those with more pressing needs, like Charles, or even Beatrice, who's been rather secretive lately." Her voice was smooth, but the mention of Beatrice felt like a calculated deflection, and Miss Marple filed it away. Thanking Clara, Miss Marple left the library, her mind sifting through the encounter. Clara's telephone call, like Beatrice's, suggested a connection to valuables, though her explanation was plausible enough to muddy the waters. Her brief absence during dinner, her polished demeanor, her vague past, all pointed to a woman skilled at concealment. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead visitor, a charming widow who had pilfered a necklace under the guise of charity work, her lies unraveling only when a letter betrayed her. Clara, with her smooth words and guarded eyes, was a similar enigma, her motives obscured by her carefully crafted facade. As she reached the hall, Miss Marple encountered Eleanor, who was adjusting a vase of roses, her hands trembling slightly. "Jane," Eleanor said, her voice low, "this delay with the constable is unbearable. Have you learned anything more? I feel the house is full of secrets." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes bright with purpose. "A little, Eleanor. Mrs. Wentworth is a fascinating woman, isn't she? So composed, yet her past is like a book with missing pages. We're getting closer, my dear, but we must be patient. Secrets, you know, have a way of slipping out." Eleanor nodded, her face etched with hope and worry, and Miss Marple gave her a reassuring pat before heading to the drawing room. There, she settled by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as she considered Clara's words and Sarah's revelation. The telephone call, the mention of valuables, the deflection toward Beatrice. All were threads in the tapestry of the theft, tangling with Charles's debts, Beatrice's pride, and Grayson's discretion. Clara's absence during dinner, though brief, offered opportunity, and her interest in the Haverford history suggested a motive beyond mere curiosity. The ring, Miss Marple felt, was still within reach, its thief caught in a web of their own making. As the fire crackled, she resolved to set a trap, certain that one of the suspects would betray themselves with a careless step. Chapter 10. The Trap is Set. The late afternoon at Willow Grange cast long shadows across the estate, the fading light lending an air of secrecy to its polished halls and sprawling gardens. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped with care, sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she turned over the threads of the sapphire ring's theft. Her conversations with Charles, Beatrice, Grayson, and Clara had woven a tapestry of motives and opportunities. Charles's debts, Beatrice's clandestine call, Grayson's hidden passages, Clara's elusive past. But the truth remained just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue. In St. Mary Mead, she had once flushed out a thief by spreading a rumor of a found clue, and she resolved to set a similar trap at Willow Grange, hoping to stir the guilty into revealing themselves. She sought out Lady Eleanor in her private sitting room, where the fire cast a warm glow over the delicate furnishings and the miniature portrait of the ring's original owner. Eleanor was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the strain of the theft etched into her features. "Jane," she said, her voice low, "the constable's delay is torment. I feel as if the house itself is watching us, waiting for the truth. Have you any hope?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes bright with purpose. "A great deal, Eleanor. People, you see, cannot help but betray themselves when pressed. I have an idea, a small ruse to shake the tree. As it were, might we gather the household tonight and announce that a jeweler is coming tomorrow to appraise the ring's setting? We could suggest a clue has been found, something about the ring's unique filigree, perhaps. It may prompt someone to act." Eleanor's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through her worry. "A trap, you mean? Oh, Jane, do you think it will work? What if the thief has already sent the ring away?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her expression thoughtful. "I think the ring is still close, Eleanor. A thief bold enough to take it under our noses would need time to dispose of it safely, especially with the constable expected. Let us see who stirs at the news." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead incident, where a whispered rumor about a stolen watch had sent the culprit scurrying to retrieve it from a garden shed. Here, too, she hoped the pressure of discovery would unsettle the guilty. Eleanor agreed, and that evening the household gathered in the drawing-room after dinner. The air was thick with tension, the guests' polite smiles masking their unease. Charles lounged by the fireplace, his cigarette case gleaming in his hand, though his eyes darted restlessly. Beatrice sat stiffly, her emerald brooch a defiant spark against her dark dress, her fingers toying with a lace handkerchief. Grayson stood near the door, his posture impeccable, but his face a mask of neutrality. Clara, poised in a corner chair, sipped her sherry with an air of detached calm, though Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of her grip on the glass. Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite the strain in her eyes. "I have news," she said, addressing the room. A jeweler from London will arrive tomorrow to examine the ring's setting, should we recover it. We've found a clue, a detail about the filigree, unique to the Haverford sapphire. It may help us trace where the ring has gone." Her words were carefully vague, but the effect was immediate. A ripple of unease passed through the room, like a breeze stirring still water. Charles's cigarette paused mid-air, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered, exhaling a casual plume of smoke. "Well, that's something, Aunt Eleanor," he said, his tone light. "Sounds like you're closing in. Hope it turns up soon." But Miss Marple caught the way his free hand clenched briefly, a sign of nerves he could not fully conceal. Beatrice's handkerchief twisted in her fingers, her lips pursing. "A jeweler?" she said, her voice sharp. "I hope this isn't some wild goose chase, Eleanor. The ring's likely long gone by now, sold to some shady dealer." Her eyes flicked toward Charles, then Clara, a silent accusation in her glance, and Miss Marple noted the defensiveness in her posture, as if she were bracing for scrutiny. Grayson's expression remained unchanged, his hands clasped behind his back, but Miss Marple saw his eyes shift briefly to the French doors, as if recalling their significance. "A wise precaution, my lady," he said smoothly. "I shall ensure the staff cooperate fully with the jeweler." His voice was calm, but Miss Marple wondered if his composure hid a calculation. Clara set her sherry glass down, with deliberate care, her smile serene, but her eyes alert. "How clever, Eleanor," she said. "A clue in the filigree, such a distinctive feature. I do hope it leads to the ring's return." Her words were gracious, but Miss Marple caught the slight hesitation, as if Clara were weighing the implications of the announcement. The gathering dispersed soon after, the guests retreating to their rooms or the library, their murmured conversations laced with unease. Miss Marple, however, lingered in the drawing-room, her knitting a quiet rhythm as she positioned herself by a window overlooking the garden. The trap was set, and she intended to watch for any movement that might betray the thief. The French doors, the rose bushes, the elms beyond, they were the stage for the theft, and she suspected they would be again tonight. As the house settled into silence, Miss Marple slipped into the library, where a side window offered a clearer view of the garden path. The moon was half hidden by clouds, casting a dim glow over the rose bushes and the distant elms. She sat in the shadows, her knitting untouched, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Minutes stretched into an hour, and then she saw it, a figure moving swiftly from the French doors, cloaked in a dark coat. The figure paused by the rose bushes, crouching as if searching the ground, their movements frantic but cautious. Miss Marple leaned closer, her heart quickening. The figure was male, she thought, judging by the broad shoulders, and the moonlight caught a glint of fair hair. Charles, she realized, his restlessness driving him to act. He rummaged briefly, then straightened, glancing toward the house before, retreating into the shadows of the elms. Miss Marple's mind raced. Was he retrieving the ring, or checking to ensure it was still hidden? His actions suggested guilt, but she needed more to be certain. Before she could decide whether to follow, another sound caught her ear. A soft click from the hall. Slipping silently to the door, she peered out and saw Beatrice, her shawl clutched tightly, entering the study. The faint glow of a lamp followed, and Miss Marple crept closer, her footsteps muffled on the carpet. Through the crack in the door, she saw Beatrice at the telephone, her voice low but urgent. "Yes, tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll bring it to London, but it must be discreet. The jeweler's coming, and I can't risk—" She stopped, as if sensing a presence, and hung up quickly, her face pale as she turned toward the door. Miss Marple retreated to the library, her heart steady despite the thrill of discovery. Beatrice's call, so soon after the announcement, suggested panic, perhaps a plan to move the ring before the jeweler's supposed arrival. Yet Charles's garden search pointed to him, his debts a compelling motive. Grayson, too, remained a shadow in her thoughts, his access to the passages and gate a lingering question. Clara, meanwhile, had retired early, claiming a headache, but her absence felt too convenient, her calm a mask that might yet slip. Returning to her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her racing thoughts. The trap had worked, stirring Charles and Beatrice into action, but the ring's location remained elusive. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead theft, where a gardener's boy had hidden a stolen watch in a hollow tree, only to betray himself by checking it too often. Here, the garden was the key, she felt, its shadows hiding the sapphire, or its thief's intent. As the moon dipped behind the clouds, Miss Marple resolved to confront the suspects tomorrow, certain that one would falter under the weight of their own guilt. Chapter 11. The Confession. The morning sun broke through the clouds at Willow Grange, casting a tentative light over the estate's manicured lawns and silent halls. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped medicinal plants, and took a seat by the window in the drawing-room, her knitting bag at her side. The trap she had set the previous evening had borne fruit. Charles's frantic search in the garden, Beatrice's urgent telephone call, but the sapphire ring remained hidden, its thief's identity still a shadow in her mind. Today, with the constable's arrival imminent, she resolved to bring the matter to a head, using the gentle pressure of truth to unmask the culprit. In St. Mary Mead, she had once resolved a theft by gathering the villagers and letting their reactions betray the guilty, and she planned a similar approach now. She requested that Lady Eleanor gather the household in the drawing-room at 11 o'clock, a summons delivered with the gravity of a formal announcement. As the hour approached, Miss Marple positioned herself near the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes scanning the room for signs of unease. The suspects arrived one by one, their faces a study in guarded tension. Charles Haverford entered first, his usual charm subdued, his hands restless as he lit a Dunhill cigarette, the brand Miss Marple had noted in contrast to the player's butt in the garden. Beatrice Langley followed, her auburn hair tightly pinned, her emerald brooch gleaming defiantly, though her eyes darted nervously. Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood by the door, his posture impeccable, but his face a mask of calm that Miss Marple found almost too perfect. Clara Wentworth, the last to arrive, settled into a chair with her polished grace, her smile serene, but her fingers betraying a slight tremor as she smoothed her skirt. Eleanor stood at the center, her face pale but resolute. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady. "The constable will be here soon, but Miss Marple has asked to speak first. I trust her judgment, and I ask you to listen carefully." She gestured to Miss Marple, who rose, her small figure commanding the room with quiet authority. Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost frail, but her words carried weight. "I've no wish to cause distress," she began, her needles still in her hands. But the loss of Lady Eleanor's ring is a wound to this house, and the truth must heal it. People, you see, are not so different, whether in a village like mine or a grand estate like this. They act from need, fear, or frailty, and those frailties leave traces. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, noting Charles's tightened jaw, Beatrice's clenched handkerchief, Grayson's rigid stillness, Clara's careful stillness. Last night I spoke of a jeweler coming to examine the ring's filigree, a clue to its whereabouts. It stirred some of you, as I hoped. I saw Mr. Charles in the garden, searching near the rose bushes, as if something precious were hidden there. Charles's cigarette froze mid-air, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. Miss Marple continued, her tone gentle but relentless. "Mrs. Langley, you made a call to a jeweler, speaking of a valuable item, just after the announcement. A coincidence, perhaps, but secrets are heavy burdens." Beatrice's face flushed, her lips parting in protest, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her gaze steady. "Mr. Grayson," she said, turning to the butler, "your knowledge of the house's passages offers unseen paths, and your disapproval of Mr. Charles's ways is no secret. Loyalty can twist into judgment." Grayson's expression remained impassive, but his hands clasped tighter behind his back. "And Mrs. Wentworth," Miss Marple said, her eyes meeting Clara's, "your interest in the Haverford history, your call about valuables, curious timing for a guest. In my village, I've seen charm hide cunning." Clara's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her skirt. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice softening. "The ring was taken during a moment of chaos, the wine spill, the cigar break, the powder room visit. The garden was the key, I believe, its shadows a hiding place. A cigarette butt, Players, not Dunhill, lies near the rose bushes, where Mr. Charles smoked. A shadow was seen by the elms, and Mrs. Langley was there, though she denies it. Someone acted swiftly, and I believe that someone is here." Charles broke the silence, his voice sharp. "This is absurd, Miss Marple. I was outside for a cigar, yes, but I didn't take the ring. That player's butt, probably a gardener's. I'm no thief." His eyes were defiant, but his hand trembled as he stubbed out his cigarette. Beatrice's voice cut in, shrill. "How dare you accuse me? I was in the drawing room after dinner, not the garden. That call was about my brooch, not the ring. You've no proof." Her indignation was fierce, but her eyes betrayed fear. Grayson spoke, his voice calm. "Madam, I assure you, my duties kept me occupied. The passages are for service, not theft. I'd never betray her ladyship." His words were steady, but Miss Marple noted the faint strain in his posture. Clara's tone was cool, measured. "I admire your thoroughness, Miss Marple, but I was in the powder room, as I said. My call was for charity, not crime. You're mistaken." Her composure was flawless, but her eyes flicked to the door. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Charles, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Charles, the player's butt was found where you stood, yet you smoke Dunhills. The gardener saw you, not Mrs. Langley, by the rose bushes last night, searching frantically. In St. Mary Mead, a young man hid a stolen watch in a garden, driven by debts. Your debts, I hear, are heavy." Charles's face paled, his hands clenching. "You're wrong," he said, but his voice cracked. "I was looking for something else. I swear it." His eyes darted to Eleanor, then away, and Miss Marple saw the guilt in his trembling fingers. She turned to Beatrice. "Mrs. Langley, your call to the jeweler overheard by Lily, spoke of a valuable item. You thought it was your secret, but it was not. Were you planning to sell the ring? Perhaps to ease your burdens? Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief falling. How dare you? I told you it was my brooch. I'd never. Her voice broke, and she looked away, her defiance crumbling. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her resolve held. One of you took the ring, and the garden holds the proof. Mr. Charles, your search last night suggests you know where it is. Will you tell us, or shall we search the rose bushes together? The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Charles stood, his face ashen, his hands shaking. All right, he whispered, his voice breaking. It was me. I took the ring. I needed the money. Gambling debts, bad ones. During the cigar break, I slipped it off Aunt Eleanor's finger when Beatrice spilled her wine. I hid it in the garden, in a tree stump by the elms, to sell later. I thought I could replace it before anyone noticed. His voice faltered, and he sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Eleanor gasped, her hand to her mouth, tears welling. Beatrice's face froze in shock, her accusations silenced. Grayson's shoulders relaxed slightly, his loyalty vindicated. Clara's expression remained unreadable, though her eyes softened with something like pity. Miss Marple nodded, her face kind but firm. Thank you, Mr. Charles. The truth is painful, but it heals. The ring, I trust, is still in the stump? Charles nodded, unable to meet her gaze. As Eleanor called for a servant to retrieve the ring, Miss Marple sat. Her knitting resumed, her heart heavy but satisfied. The trap had worked, Charles's guilt laid bare by his own actions. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead boy, undone by a stolen coin, his confession a relief to all. Here, too, the truth had freed Willow Grange, though the scars would linger. Chapter 12. The Ring Restored. The morning at Willow Grange, bathed in the soft light of a clearing sky, felt as if the estate itself exhaled in relief after the storm of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, her shawl neatly draped, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. Charles's confession had lifted the veil of deceit, revealing the sapphire ring's hiding place in a hollowed-out tree stump by the elms. Yet the aftermath of such a revelation, she knew from her St. Mary Mead days, required delicate handling to mend the frayed bonds of family. The constable's arrival was imminent, and Miss Marple prepared to tie the final threads of the mystery, ensuring the truth settled gently among the Haverfords. Lady Eleanor, her face a mixture of relief and sorrow, had sent Grayson to retrieve the ring from the garden. He returned swiftly, the sapphire gleaming in its gold filigree setting, untouched by its brief exile in the tree stump. Eleanor held it in her palm, her eyes tracing its familiar contours, as if reassuring herself of its reality. "It's back," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "But at such a cost." She looked to Miss Marple, seated by the window, and managed a faint smile. "Jane, your wisdom has saved us from greater pain. I don't know how to thank you." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her needles pausing. "No need for thanks, Eleanor. The truth has a way of finding light, like a flower through a crack. But we must consider what comes next, for Charles and for the family." Her tone was kind but firm, her mind already turning to the delicate balance of justice and mercy. The household gathered once more in the drawing room, the air less tense but heavy with the weight of Charles's confession. Charles stood by the fireplace, his usual charm replaced by a haggard expression, his hands clasped tightly as if to steady himself. Beatrice sat rigidly, her emerald brooch absent today, her face a mask of conflicted emotions, relief at her own vindication, yet a lingering resentment toward Charles. Grayson stood by the door, his composure restored, though Miss Marple noted a quiet satisfaction in his posture, as if his loyalty to the Haverfords had been reaffirmed. Clara Wentworth, her role as a guest now peripheral, sat with her hands folded, her expression one of detached sympathy, though Miss Marple sensed she was eager to distance herself from the drama. Eleanor addressed the room, the ring now back on her finger, its sapphire catching the light. "The ring is restored," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Charles has confessed, and while his actions have wounded us, he is family. I've spoken with Miss Marple, and we agree the constable need not take him today. He will face his debts, and he will make amends, but here, with us." Her eyes met Charles's, a mixture of disappointment and love in her gaze. Charles's shoulders slumped, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Aunt Eleanor. I was desperate, debts piling up, creditors hounding me. I thought I could sell the ring and replace it before anyone knew. It was foolish, cowardly. I'll do whatever you ask to make it right." His words were raw, and Miss Marple saw the flicker of sincerity in his eyes, much like a St. Mary Mead lad who had stolen to escape a bookmaker's threats, only to find redemption in confession. Beatrice's lips tightened, but she spoke with restraint. "I hope you mean it, Charles. Your recklessness nearly ruined us all. I made inquiries about my own jewelry. It's true, to settle my own affairs. But I'd never touch Eleanor's ring." Her admission, prompted by Lily's overheard call, was grudging, but Miss Marple noted the relief in her posture, as if a weight had lifted. The jeweler's call, it seemed, had been a desperate attempt to shore up her finances, not a plot to steal. Grayson inclined his head, his voice measured. "Her ladyship's mercy is wise, Mr. Charles. The house is whole again." His words were formal, but Miss Marple caught the subtle warmth, a sign of his relief that the family's honor, and his own, remained intact. His brief absence in the passage, she now believed, was indeed a matter of service, his loyalty unshaken. Clara rose, her smile gracious but distant. "I'm glad the ring is back where it belongs, Eleanor. This has been a trying time, and I think it best I take my leave tomorrow. You've been a generous host." Her words were polite, but Miss Marple sensed her eagerness to escape the scrutiny of Willow Grange. The telephone call about valuables, likely a charity auction as she claimed, remained unproven, but Clara's role in the theft was now irrelevant, her motives a mystery best left unsolved. Miss Marple spoke last, her voice soft but clear. "A family, like a village, is bound by trust, and trust once broken can be mended with care. Mr. Charles, you've taken the first step. In St. Mary Mead, a young man once stole to escape his troubles, but he found his way back through honesty. I believe you can, too." Her eyes were kind, but her gaze held a quiet warning, a reminder that redemption required effort. As the gathering dispersed, Eleanor approached Miss Marple, her hand clasping the older woman's. "Jane, you've given us more than the ring. You've given us clarity. Will you stay a little longer?" Miss Marple smiled, patting Eleanor's hand. "Just a day or two, my dear. I've a garden to tend in St. Mary Mead, and my roses will be missing me. But I'm glad to have helped." Her thoughts drifted to her village, where the small dramas of life taught her the patterns of human nature, patterns that held true even in the grandeur of Willow Grange. Later, as she packed her knitting in her room, Miss Marple reflected on the case. The sapphire ring, a symbol of heritage, had drawn out the frailties of those around it. Charles's desperation, Beatrice's pride, Grayson's guarded loyalty, Clara's elusive charm. The garden, with its shadows and secrets, had been the thief's stage. But it was. Human nature, as always, that revealed the truth. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead theft, where a stolen locket was found in a bird's nest, its thief undone by a nervous glance. Here, Charles's frantic search had been his undoing, his guilt laid bare by the trap she had set. As she prepared for bed, the house quiet around her, Miss Marple felt the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The ring was restored, the family healing, and her work here done. With a final glance at the moonlit garden, she settled into her chair, her knitting a soft rhythm, her mind already turning to the quiet mysteries of St. Mary Mead, where another story, no doubt, awaited her sharp eyes and gentle wisdom.